Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future, and I track those predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guest for this episode is Dr. Susan Metzger. Dr. Metzger serves as the Director of Strategic Interdisciplinary Programs and Development at Kansas State University. In this role, she strategizes on institutional planning, policy development, and problem resolution. Dr. Metzger also serves as the director of Kansas Water Institute, the Kansas Center for Agricultural Research and Environment, and the Institute for Digital Agriculture and Advanced Analytics. So prior to joining Kansas State University, Dr. Metzger served as the deputy director or deputy secretary for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, where she led the agency's policy on evaluation and development related to water and natural resources. Before joining the department, Dr. Metzger worked for the Kansas Water Office for 11 years as chief of planning and policy. She also managed the watershed coordination unit, and she worked as an environmental scientist. Dr. Metzger also was instrumental in developing the vision for the future of water supply in Kansas. Dr. Metzger has a bachelor's degree in biological sciences and especially specializing in botany, and that's from the University of Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She also holds a master's degree in biological sciences, specializing in wetland sciences from Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia, and a PhD in leadership communication from Kansas State University. So on this episode, Dr. Susan Metzger and I discuss the future of water in Kansas. So Dr. Metzger, thank you very much for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. Let me start by asking you this. What does the future of water in Kansas look like to you?
Sure. Well, Ben, first, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you about probably one of my most favorite topics, which is water. So in the bio, which is always humbling to hear somebody read back to you. So I was a part of developing our statewide vision for the future of water in Kansas. So you would think that if I played a role in developing the vision for the future, that I should have some sort of knowledge or ability to be able to claim something of predicting the future for water resources in Kansas, which is also humbling. So I'll maybe predecess it with a couple of comments, because first and foremost, it's a collective thought. I'll share my thoughts and ideas of where we are going and maybe how we can shift where we're going to a more positive future. But really, I hope to provoke some thoughts for your listeners of what they predict for the future of water and what our opportunity is for changing that future. It happens to be right now I'm reading this book by an author, Leanne Moriarty. It's called Here One Moment. And so in that book, there's a woman who is a sightseer forecaster, and she's on a plane and she forecasts the manner and date of death of all the passengers on the flight, much to their chagrin. And then throughout the book, some of those are coming to fruition. So I hope what I'm sharing today is not in line with those books, with the book and that message, because also in the book, there's a lot of discussion about individual will and agency, and the ability, when you have knowledge of the predicted future, your ability to reshape that future. And so I think that we have that opportunity before us with the wealth of data and the power of technology and collective action. So with all that being said, as a preamble, two things to know about the state of Kansas. We are quite diverse. Western Kansas is groundwater driven, mostly dependent on the Ogallala High Plains Aquifer, which is a shared resource among 8 states here in the Southern Great Plains. And then Eastern Kansas is surface water driven. So a series of streams and rivers that feed into federal reservoirs and smaller lakes. Collectively, that supply, whether it's a groundwater or surface water, supports the community and the economic livelihood of the people of Kansas. So incredibly important. Both those resources have significant problems. So the Ogallala Aquifer is an ancient source, and so the water that we take out is not easily replenished. And so we know if we were to take no further action in the next 50 years, the Ogallala Aquifer would be 70% depleted, and 40% of the acres that we're able to irrigate today with about a 400-gallon per minute well, we'd no longer be able to do so. So that's my prediction for Western Kansas. Eastern Kansas, those reservoirs are not natural impoundments. They're not natural lakes. And so while those impoundments do a great job of holding back things like flood supply and water supply when we need it, it also serves to hold back things like sediment and nutrients. So our prediction for Eastern Kansas, if we were to do nothing in the next 50 years, those reservoirs would collectively be full 40% with sediment. So that's 40% of the capacity that isn't available for drinking water, for industrial supply, you name it. So that's my gross prediction of the future of water supply in Kansas without further action.
Oh my. Oh my. So why should we care about the future of water in Kansas? And when I say we, I'm talking about Kansas, but even nationally or even globally, what's the impact if we don't take action on the circumstance you just described? So why should we care about the future of water in Kansas?
Absolutely. It's easy to go about your day and take water for granted. If you lost cell service, you'd be angry instantly. The things that you find in a disruption of a day. But water really is that one thing that if you went without it for the day, certainly extended days, it impacts our human health at its core. But then it also, if you look at anything that we depend on for our families' livelihoods, our health, our community livelihood, the growth of industry, the movement of food and fibers, you name it, everything can be tracked down to whether or not there was a clean and abundant source of water. And so that's certainly true for Kansas. Our entire economic base, largely which is food and ag production, is dependent on a reliable source of water. Our ability to recruit new industries and businesses to the state of Kansas, one of the first things they look at is whether or not there's a reliable source of water to even decide to move your company to the state. So to me, water is the backbone for our current economy, the potential for our growth and economy, and then our day-to-day health and livelihoods. So you take that away, you reduce our ability to access water, the water that you receive is no longer of good quality, then everything else around it crumbles.
Oh my, yeah. So what's being done now to adapt to or even change the future of water in Kansas?
Yeah, that's where I think the real power is. I spend very little of my time worrying about the impending doom. I hope I never reach a moment of saying I told you so, unless the I told you so is that I believe in the power of people and their agency to make positive change. That's the I told you so, that I'd rather be the outcome of the story rather than the inevitable future of the Ogallala and our reservoirs. Because there are things happening every day at a small and personal level to larger policy level and financial investments into securing a reliable future for the state of water, not only for Kansas, but for the Southern Great Plains nationwide. the work we do here in Kansas is applicable beyond our state borders, beyond our national borders. And so that's exciting. It's powerful. So I'll share just a couple of examples. This one even goes back to history. So we'll start in eastern Kansas with our network of reservoirs. So back in the 1950s, throughout the nation, there were a series of really traumatic floods that were occurring nationwide, coming right off the heels of several years of drought. And so the federal government at the time, through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Bureau of Reclamation, invested in a network of federal reservoirs throughout the United States. And as they were making that federal investment, they offered the opportunity for communities and states, if you want to pay into the investment of building these reservoirs, then you can have access to the supply that happens beyond that dam. The state of Kansas is the only state to have taken the federal government up on that offer. Tremendous foresight for our Kansas legislators and governors back in the 1950s. And because they've done that, when we reach times of shortage, we have the surety of the water supply that is stored in those federal reservoirs. It gives us the luxury that many of our neighbors do not have. And so that also is an obligation then to continue to secure and protect that reservoir. So we invest funds of putting practices in the ground that reduce sedimentation into the reservoir to hopefully slow that impending loss of storage capacity. And we also shape policy so that we continue to have the access to that storage and our agreements with the Army Corps of Engineers. So small things, putting a terrace on the ground to complete legislative changes that help secure that water supply for eastern Kansas. And the same for western Kansas. I'm every day, literally every day, there's a new technology that I learn about that is helping us measure our water better, more precisely apply irrigation water, changes in crop varieties that will reduce water demand while still being really nutritional, high value for cattle and dairy. So I'm constantly amazed by the new technology and really a pretty ready willingness to adopt technology from a producer perspective, knowing that all of that is a risk and a financial investment. And then also larger from a policy perspective, the number of acres now under what's called a local enhanced management area, or a LEMA in western Kansas, is growing and substantial. And so these are locally led conservation plans that impose a conservation restriction on the water users in exchange for certain flexibilities. And so those things, putting a soil moisture probe in the ground, all the way to being willing to adopt a policy change that affects your livelihood, are just examples of we're not okay with that inevitable future of a declining or degrading water resource, that we really have the power and agency to make a change.
Yeah, so you mentioned technology, and one of the things I've thought about, and I know nothing about this, and I don't know if you do either, but I'll ask it anyway. I've always wondered if there is a possibility of transforming ocean water into drinking water. Is there any research going on with that right now?
Absolutely. Not only research, application. So I consider probably one of the greatest areas of the world as far as investment in water research and water technology is in Israel. And so Israel, a very arid setting, and highly, for political reasons, dependent on securing their own water supply. And so they've been able to implement a network of desalination that makes use of very high salty water and converting that for irrigation application on their crops, but also drinking water. We see that in coastal settings, like in California, the opportunity to take ocean water, desalinate it, and then provide it for drinking water or for irrigation. The challenge is it does come at a cost. It comes at a cost financially from an engineering perspective, and then also from an energy perspective. Pulling the salts out of the water does take energy. And so from a natural resource perspective, you're looking at a trade-off as well. But when you're in a very water short area and the ocean is right there, it's a technology to continue to adapt and perfect, to drive down the cost, to drive down the energy consumption, to identify the beneficial use of the salts that you are pulling from that water, because that's a waste stream that comes from it. And it's something that we're also learning about here in Kansas, far separated from the oceans. You don't really think about Kansas being a salty state, saltwater state, but some of our aquifers actually are saline water, and they become more saline as we pull fresh water out of them. And so at a localized level, being able to find lower cost alternatives for pulling the salts out of that water means we have access to another source of freshwater supply.
Well, I'll give you I don't know if I should say this. I have for a long time, when I take my showers, I just get wet and then I turn the water off and then I soap up and do, shampoo my hair and all that. And then I turn the water back on just because I think I'm doing something.
Absolutely.
So I don't know if that makes a difference or not. Maybe it makes a difference if a lot of people do that, but I'm just thinking about what can an individual do?
Yeah.
What power does an individual have to just make these slight changes in their lives to save water, conserve water? So is it possible if a lot of individuals are, taking showers, just like I mentioned, or not irrigating our yards, maybe reducing the water that we use in our yards? There just seems like there's so many ways that we could conserve water and reduce the usage of water. So help me understand that with the research and your involvement and influence especially in the Kansas community. What are you telling people, and does it make a difference at all if we do any of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. So many ways to think about that. So first of all, let's think of the counter. What if everybody just said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I consolidate my loads of wash so I have fewer, laundry to go through, or turn off the faucet when I'm brushing my teeth. What if we all just said it doesn't matter? Well, then think of the cumulative extra consumption that happens. And so if you take that mentality and shift it, then you can see the cumulative benefit of the conservation approach. Every drop matters. And so, yes, more importantly, I think it's a mindset thing that if you approach your day of really consciously thinking about being aware of your water use, then that's something that can really spread. You're thinking intentionally about it in the food that you purchase, in the ways that you go about your day, which really will have a significant impact. And in communities like the city of Hayes that actually capture that in their policy and their municipal framework, you can actually see the measurable impact of it. So the city of Hayes has the lowest per capita per gallon water use of any place in Kansas. And it's because they have requirements of restricted lawn watering, even what you can plant in your water, the landscaping that goes around businesses and hotels, the infrastructure that goes into new buildings, such as low flow toilets and things like that. All of that adds up to the opportunity that the city of Hayes is still growing in a relatively arid setting.
Okay. Well, really appreciate the comments, and it's really an important topic for all of us to consider. So, Dr. Metzger, thanks so much for being a guest on the I Told You So podcast. So, if listeners want to learn more, you can send an email message to Dr. Metzger at SMETZGER. That's Metzger at ksu.edu. Because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are these. What can you do to create a positive future for water in Kansas? And if you don't live in Kansas, wherever you're at, whatever state you're in, whatever country you're in, what can you do to create a positive future for water? And how are you currently conserving water? And how do you plan to conserve water in the future? And how do you plan to help with ensuring water conservation and clean water is there for your community now and in the future? So I'd like to know, let me know. You can text or call me at 1-785-473-3721 or send an email message to ITYS at BenKohlITYS.com or post on any of my social media channels. So I do ask you to go to the I Told You So podcast website at BenKohlITYS. That's BenKohlITYS.com. You can go there to connect and get your own I Told You So items at the merchandise link. So you can choose from shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, and lots of other items. The I Told You So podcast is what I hope a space for healthy discourse and effective debate with a goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. Also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know that too. So thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast. And thanks again to my guest, Dr. Susan Metzger. Followers of the podcast are very important. So please follow, like, subscribe, leave a comment, and give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.